what about gun control? There's already a lot of gun control, quite frankly, in this country, whether it be financial or registration or waiting periods, all of which obviously have an adverse effect on minorities getting a hold and being able to exercise their Second Amendment rights. But now there's even calls for more. People want to ban handguns. They want to get rid of anything that's more than 10 capacity magazines. They want to get rid of any semi-automatic rifles. But you don't hear anything about that. And it's curious, why is it, do you think, that the media in their narrative, they're all about wanting unfettered access to almost anyone to be able to vote, but yet they don't want to have minorities and people that are poor to be able to own firearms? What's your take on that?
Well, the reason for the push for gun registration or gun restriction, and for a long time we've called it gun control, and I'll tell you what, you're going to notice that the narrative engineers are going to start to shift the language. They're going to start to refer to it no longer, because pretty much everybody's called it gun control for years. They're going to start to call it gun safety measures. They're going to do that because that sells better, and they certainly wouldn't call it what it really is, which is gun restrictions, right? Because that would obviously be a violation of the Second Amendment. The right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Maybe we should call it gun infringement or something, gun rights infringement, because that's what it really is. And, we've been holding stories now for a couple of weeks. I'm glad you brought this up because we've been trying to get to some of these gun control stories, particularly some of the bills that have already passed the House of Representatives and are now pending in the Senate, where they don't know that they're going to be able to get the votes in the Senate to actually go through with these measures. We got Joe Manchin out of West Virginia is apparently a holdout, and that may be why his wife was recently given a post in the Biden administration. In other words, bring him in closer so you can control him a little bit and try to get him to vote. And again, they're going to start calling it gun safety measures, but these are infringements of your gun rights. And why do they want to do this? Well, they've always wanted to disempower people. They want a monopoly on force in the government. They want the only people who have guns to be people in the government. So the military, law enforcement, and other people in the government. And you know that they don't want a wide-scale disappearance of firearms or gun bans because these same people, these Congress people, these, Minneapolis city council members and others, when they go around, they want their armed security guards. They've got, if they have to, they'll hire private security to protect them, always armed. These people don't want to go anywhere without an armed person to protect them, but they want you to have to go everywhere without the ability to even protect yourself. And you're exactly right, Murdoch. This is a big issue for people in minority communities, I think particularly in the black community, because they view the ability to legally possess a firearm as basically their sole means of protection. Because a lot of times, it's not just, don't boil it down to saying, well, you can't count on the police. The point is, when you need the police there in seconds, they're minutes away, right? They can't get there fast enough. It's not that they don't want to necessarily. They just can't get there fast enough to stop a robbery, a rape, a murder on the spot. A lot of times that is left to the individual citizen to stop, and we've got some stories about that we might be able to get to that happened, for instance, in D.C. over the weekend to an Uber Eats driver, and you probably saw that story. So why do they want to disempower people? Because then they can totally run roughshod over all of the other rights. And I understand this is not popular to talk about in an open forum, but the truth of the matter is that the Second Amendment wasn't created to protect your rights to hunt. That wasn't what it was for. It wasn't for hunting. It was to keep the power in the hands of the people, because our founding fathers had just experienced what it meant to not have the power in the hands of the people, and they knew that the only way they got out of that situation was by being able to be armed, by being able to arm up the Continental Army to fight the British and free themselves from the colonialist rule of the British. And they only could do that because they were able to arm themselves. So that's what the Second Amendment is about. It's a bulwark against tyranny because the population is armed. It also serves a lot of other important purposes, like the right of self-defense, which is a primal right. That's not a right that you have to have written on a piece of paper. That's a right that comes from God. That's a right that exists in nature, the right of self-defense, the right to fight back, to protect yourself from another creature who's trying to take away your rights to life, liberty, and property. And you have the right to defend yourself. That's what the Second Amendment is about, and ultimately the defense against a tyrannical government. So the reason they want to get rid of that is clear, because then there's no bulwark against tyranny. Then literally the Biden administration, the Biden-Harris administration, as they've taken to calling it, can do whatever they want to do. But it's also an interesting question of why they don't want voter integrity laws in place. I mean, just think about the provisions that they're trying to put in place to have you, and some that are already in place, when you go to buy a firearm. You have to show, what do you have to show? You have to show an ID. If you've got a concealed carry, you've got to show both your concealed carry and your driver license. They take a scan of these. They keep this information. They want to know who has these guns. Then you got to fill out a form. You got to give all your personal identifying information. You don't have to give your social, but it's recommended. If you don't give your social, the check takes longer, by the way. And then you've got to answer all these questions. And by the way, they don't check the answers to those questions. You just have to check no. Except for the first question, you better check yes on the first question. But all the others are no. And we know this because we know Hunter Biden was able to get a gun, even though he was apparently in the throes of cocaine addiction. So he was able to get a gun, which you have to answer a question about whether you're addicted to any illegal drugs. That's one of the questions that you better answer no to if you want to purchase the gun. Otherwise, your application will be rejected. But think about that level of background check to purchase a firearm, and yet we're told it is racist to have somebody have to show an ID to vote. I mean, how does that make any sense? So why, on the one hand, do they want no integrity, and on the other hand, the background checks that are in place, which are already extensive, aren't enough? Well, they're trying to get rid of individual gun ownership and gun rights in the United States of America. I don't know whether they will succeed. I know they're talking, Biden is talking about doing some kind of an executive order. He won't say what it is because they don't want to give any amount of a heads up to the other side to be able to prepare a legal strategy to deal with this. They're talking about doing some kind of executive order, though, on gun violence because they claim they can't. Well, they suspect they may not be able to get it passed through the Congress. And there's a lot of elements to that, including talking about the filibuster. But Roxanne, it's so funny that you called Murdoch, because during the break, while we were talking here in the studio, we were talking about the concept of the voter integrity law that's passed in Georgia. And you're exactly right. All kinds of integrity was thrown out of the past election when they decided they would accept mail-in ballots from anybody. They would accept ballot harvesting. They would accept drop boxes where the ballots are just dropped in a ballot box somewhere on the side of a road. I mean, who dropped the ballot in there? Was it even the person who signed their name on the ballot? Well, you don't know because they don't do a signature match. So that could be anybody voting your ballot for you. Now, why do they not want that integrity? And why does it suddenly become, and let's just be straightforward about it, they're saying it's racist to ask for an ID. Why is that? How can it be is it racist to have to have a driver license to drive a car? If you want to get into a lot of federal buildings like the federal courthouse, if you want to get into the U.S. Attorney's Office, if they'll let you in, you got to have an appointment, by the way. If you want to get into these places, you have to show an ID. I mean, you got to show an ID to do a lot of things. You got to show an ID to buy alcohol, right? Buy cigarettes. Is that racist? You got to show an ID to do a lot of things, to get your utilities set up. I mean, if you're going to if your ID hasn't been moved over to that new Real ID Act ID with the little gold star on it, you got to take all kinds of stuff down to the DMV. You got to take like your original birth certificate. Like, who even has this stuff? Your original Social Security card, your utility bills, other proofs of identification, all to get your ID updated. Is that racist? I mean, are minorities not driving in this country? Do they not have IDs? Can they not purchase alcohol? Can they not purchase cigarettes? They can't do any of the things that a lot of people do in this country. Is that really what's going on here? No. It's not what's going on, because guess what? Minorities do have IDs. People have IDs in this country. This is not a racist thing, but the Democrats are spinning the narrative, and the media is working hand in glove with them as hard as they can to spin the narrative, and they think if we just keep saying it on TV, if we just keep repeating it over and over and over again, even though it's a lie, people will believe it, and it will become the truth. And it suddenly will become racist to have an ID to vote. That's just crazy. Is that how you feel about it, Murdoch? We got about 30 seconds.
100%. Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, hey, thanks very much for the call. Always great to hear from the listeners out there. We love putting on some of your perspective. Thank you for listening to the Morgan Streetman Show. We hope you enjoyed what you heard, and if you did, please click like and subscribe to help us out. And remember that we recommend that you exercise your brain at least once a week.